So, folks, we thought it was never going to happen. They've speculated the idea, and this is coming from the same party that introduced the carbon tax and championed it for quite an extensive period where nobody wanted it, nobody understood it, nobody knew why we had to pay for carbon pricing that doesn't do anything really for the environment. It was just more taxation for the Liberal Party. Well, it is now official from the National Post. Carney cuts carbon tax rate to zero, neutralizing unpopular policy before possible campaign. The gesture marked a stark departure from how Canadian leaders have typically done business and was reminiscent of a scene Canadians are most used to seeing south of the border. So, the really highlighting parts, according to like National Post and the mainstream media, not the fact that Mark Carney, and we're going to get into how this is kind of not exactly groundbreaking news because of who Mark Carney is and who he represents and his business ties on why the carbon tax even exists. But the big highlight here they want to tell people is the fact that Mark Carney did an executive order in a boardroom the same way Trump would do in America. Even though we're supposed to hate America and we're supposed to be like angered towards them, we're supposed to boo their national anthem. How dare you vote for this maniac president and Elon Musk and go through these trials and how dare you do that? Turns out we mimic their exact actions and we applaud that. So, with the swipe of a Sharpie, Prime Minister Mark Carney reduced the price of the consumer carbon tax rate to zero, meaning Canadians will no longer be paying it on fuels. In doing so, he also neutralized one of the Liberals' most unpopular policies before a widely expected election call. So, supposedly, they said it was supposed to be announced today. I haven't heard anything yet. So, if it does get announced, we will do like a breaking news story, but I haven't heard anything yet that Mark Carney or anybody else is calling for an election. They were supposed to. That was kind of the idea that once Mark Carney gets ushered into the prime minister and Justin Trudeau's out, that ideally they were going to call for election, but who knows? Carney invited cameras into the cabinet room on Parliament Hill Friday afternoon to watch him sign a document zeroing out the tax rate. The gesture marked a stark departure from how Canadian leaders have typically done business in the past and was reminiscent of a scene Canadians are most used to seeing south of the border, as U.S. President Donald Trump routinely invites media to the Oval Office to watch him sign executive orders. But sitting around a boardroom is the kind of setting Mark Carney is used to, given his private sector business experience and time spent as a central bank governor in both Canada and England. Oh, we got to make sure it's comfortable enough for Mark Carney. So as cabinet ministers looked on, Carney delivered some brief statements before opening a red folder placed in front of him. We have already taken a big decision as a cabinet because this is a cabinet that's focused on action. It's focused on getting more money in the pockets of Canadians. It's focused on building this economy, he said as he sat in the cabinet table. Based on the discussion we have had and consistent with a promise I made and others supported during the Liberal leadership campaign, we will be eliminating the Canadian fuel charge, the consumer fuel charge, immediately. Canadians are on track to receive a carbon tax rebate due to be sent out next month. Should still expect to receive one, Carney said, which means checks could be arriving in the midst of an election campaign, which Carney is widely expected to call within the next 2 weeks. Good timing. You're going to get a nice check. Your carbon tax rebate that they tell you is more money than what you paid for, which is an absolute lie. But you're going to get some money back at a time when the election's going to potentially be called. Coincidence. This will make a difference to hard-pressed Canadians, but in part of a much bigger set of measures that this government is taking to ensure that we fight against climate change, that our other companies are competitive, and the country moves forward, Carney said. technically speaking, Carney eliminated the consumer carbon tax through regulation, scaling back the price to zero, explained Stephen Gilbert, the outgoing environment minister and anti-oil activist who was shuffled into the heritage ministry on Friday. Carney signaled his plan to eliminate the tax after being sworn in as Canada's 24th prime minister earlier Friday. Making good on his pledge dealt a blow to the opposition conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who has spent the past 2 years crisscrossing the country campaigning on a pledge to axe the tax, blaming it on for the high cost of food and fuel Canadians were paying. In recent weeks, however, Poilievre has been forced to shift his message away from calling for a carbon tax election in light of Canadians' increasing concern about U.S. President Donald Trump and his trade war with Canada, as well as consistent comments around annexation. So this is the blow that Pierre Poilievre is doing to himself. And this is one of the things this is his blind spot during this campaign. Because Pierre Poilievre was on top of the polling, on top of favorability, on top of a lot of Canadians, because he was hitting hard against the Liberal Party. He was hitting hard against the party that created a lot of this disaster, created a lot of the problems, and that is what made him so popular and connected a lot of people towards the Conservative Party. But now, because Pierre Poilievre, now that they did this carbon tax initiative to zero, Pierre Poilievre is now switching his tone more towards sounding more like a liberal leader. That, oh, Trump, we gotta be focused on Trump. We gotta be focused on the tariffs. Trump is stealing our jobs. We did a whole segment about how Pierre Poilievre is screwing himself in this process by sounding more and more like the typical Liberal Party than he would actually confronting the Liberal Party, which actually gained him more of his popularity. It gained him more of his popularity when he was criticizing the Liberal Party, when he was going after them for causing a lot of these problems, but now he's not doing that anymore. And it's costing him a lot of support. Carney is pitching himself to Canadians as the leader with the most economic and management experience needed to take on Trump. Again, experience we have no idea about. Nobody knows a thing about this guy, but apparently he's the most successful. He's got a lot of experience. He knows how to deal with Trump. But you can't ask where. Can't ask where the experience came from. He has said he is open to seeking the mandate instead of returning to Parliament, which is set to resume on March 24th. Under former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who officially resigned on Friday, the Liberals had dismissed Poilievre's criticism as exaggerated and exploiting Canadians' anxieties around the cost of living, which skyrocketed inflation rose coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So, the only thing that the Liberal Party has to attack Pierre Poilievre is saying he's exaggerating and exploiting Canadians who are worried about the cost of living. Average Canadians that we know there's a existential crisis with cost of living, with inflation, with the housing market, with homelessness. There's 10 cities all across the nation with a drug epidemic, with a crime epidemic. So, someone to point that out is exaggeration and exploitive on Canadians' anxieties. That's all they have. That's all they have. And Trump. That's all they have. Because they're not actually willing to resolve these problems that they have caused. But now they're trying to change the tone. They're trying to garner more support and trick Canadians by signing this pledge to cancel the carbon tax. But just wait. Because technically, the carbon tax is here to stay. So, him signing this document, signing the removal of the carbon tax, isn't exactly removing the carbon tax. And you'll see why in a second here. So, here's Mark Carney in the boardroom officially signing the document. Unfortunately, I didn't have the video to go along with this. For some reason you can't get the video of this. I don't know why, but there's the photograph there. And Mark Carney officially tweeted this out. The world is shifting and Canada needs to be ready. The consumer carbon tax was too divisive and we should be pulling together. That's why I took the action to cancel on day one. There's the document there. But this is Mark Carney after all. And this is where people should not get their hopes up. Don't be fooled by the pretty face liberal, as Jane Fonda said about Justin Trudeau. Don't be fooled to think that Mark Carney signed this order to cancel the consumer carbon tax is going to automatically decrease a lot of the problems and tensions with Canadians, because they're still initializing a carbon tax. It's just not going to be it's not going to be obvious to you, but they're going to do it in secrecy. So here's Mark Carney back in the day for his entire career, from Brookfield to the governors of Bank of England, Bank of Canada, doing all this financing, was pledging for a carbon tax, pledging for some sort of initiative to manufacture consent so we can push for more changes in our policy. And that's what the carbon tax was initially for, was trying to change the perception and change the ideals of Canadians into this agenda. So here's Mark Carney, back when he was the bank governor of England, stating that his entire focus and his entire purpose is to initialize the carbon tax. Listen to this.
I would say I see myself as part of the social movement. I think those at the vanguard of the social movement might see me as being farther behind. And I've, absolutely full credit, and I do in the book, to Greta Thunberg, who I've had the pleasure of meeting several times, and who absolutely has catalyzed that movement, the youth movement.
Who, by the way, Greta Thunberg is no longer in the media sphere. Notice how no one's talking about her, because now she's focused on protesting for Palestine. And because you cross the line, you're no longer accepted in the in polite society. You cross the line into supporting Palestine. You cross the line. She was favorable with people like Mark Carney and the other billionaires, which is why she's a psyop, because and knew that was totally fake. She was cozying up to the billionaire class that were the biggest polluters, that are jet setters, that have nothing to do with the environment. And now all of a sudden she's no longer, you don't see her around because she's supporting Palestine. Isn't that ironic?
And also done something incredibly valuable, and this is embarrassing to admit, but I think we should admit it. And this is often true, by the way, in finance. Very obvious truths are not fully understood in the system. So what she hammered home was the carbon budget, how small it was, how rapidly it was being depleted. And we've moved in a few short years, in part because of her, from a world of ESG, sustainability, broader conversations around, as I say, sustainability, to a relentless focus on net zero. It's called the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero for a reason, because we've moved to the relentless logic of having to get emissions down consistent with the carbon budget. So in that regard, I'm part of that, and part of mapping what people want to the mechanisms, particularly in finance, in order to deliver it. I'm also, though, conscious that of two other things, Lionel. One is that, of course, net zero it's absolutely essential to stabilize the climate, but that's not the same thing as protecting biodiversity. It's not the same thing as having a just transition along the way. There are lots of other elements that are necessary to this that these broader social movements rightly shine a light on. So
a guy who's been consistent before becoming prime minister, constantly been saying the carbon budget's too low, that we got to increase carbon taxes, we got to push people, into cutting back emissions. Not people like him. He still travels around on private jets. Same with Trudeau. Same with any other person who screams the loudest about climate change, which is why it's so such a hypocrisy. and very questionable at this point, the whole intentions of this, because the people that scream the loudest about climate change and pollution are the contributors. They're the ones that contribute the most to pollution. They're the ones that contribute the most to these insane, just utter hypocrisy, to the fact that they're flying over to Davos, they're flying over to all these climate summits, and yet lecturing you that you can't drive your vehicle, you can't have gas-powered lawn equipment, you can't have a gas stove, you can't have this. We got to cut back on food. We got to scream about the farmers. Farmers, the most ecological profession that I know of. They're one with nature. They grow crops. And you're going to demonize farmers instead of demonizing the billionaire class. So, a guy who has been consistent about trying to raise the carbon taxes just decided to eliminate them. Huh. There's got to be something to this. Well, it turns out there is. Cat Canada points out, Mark Carney says the consumer carbon tax will be gone only because the large polluters will have to pay. And somehow those big companies won't pass the costs on to you, the consumer. Sounds like fairy tale magic, if you ask me. It sounds like they're trying to memory hole what started the carbon tax. And people remember when 2019 Justin Trudeau was trying to push this along, this is the exact wording they used. The exact wording. Oh, it's not going to affect the consumer. We're only going to put it onto the big polluters. It's only for the companies that are involved in pollution. They're going to have to pay their share. They're going to have to pay their price for polluting our planet. It's not going to affect you. It's never going to affect you. That was the promise they said in 2019. And look what happened. It was a domino effect because those large companies passed the tax further and further onto you. That's why your food increased. That's why fuel increased. That's why home heating increased. Because it was a domino effect from the top down. And that's what happened in 2019. And now they're doing the exact same thing in 2025. Only the only difference is it's not noticeable. Because while Mark Carney is waving around victoriously about cutting the consumer carbon tax, there's still a carbon tax. And it's still going to be affected to you. It's still going to be affected to you. Especially because the billionaires and the CEOs, the big businesses that they're trying to pressure to eliminate their emissions can buy carbon credits. So is that really going to affect their pollution rate? Is it really going to affect them when they could just buy out the politician? They could buy out the restrictions? Bill Gates even said it. Bill Gates says, oh, I don't have to cut back on my private jets. I don't have to cut back on anything because I could just buy out. I could buy out my carbon credits. So what is the point of this? What is the point? Because it's not going to reduce pollution. It's not going to challenge big businesses. But it is going to make things harder and more expensive for someone like you. Because now it's going to be served to you. It just won't be noticeable. And now because you cut the consumer carbon tax, you're also going to lose the rebate. So this whole thing is a gotcha. This whole thing is a complete gimmick. It's a sham. To think that he's going to actually cut the carbon tax while still putting a carbon tax on. It's not eliminating the carbon tax. It's remodeling. It's rebranding. So here's what he stated to a room full of potential voters about this.
If you just axe the tax, you don't help our steel companies and our auto companies become more competitive in a world where we need new trading partners. So what we did is, we proposed is to, yes, axe the tax for individuals, for small businesses, for farms, for medium-sized businesses. It's going to be gone. I'm elected leader. And it'll be gone by April 1st, just to be clear. But we said, at the same time, we're going to make sure that our businesses can become more competitive. And at the same time, we're going to make sure every Canadian, if they want to make investments in insulating their homes or driving a more fuel-efficient car, reducing emissions, reducing costs otherwise, we're going to get the large polluters to pay you for it, not the taxpayers, the large polluters.
Again, sounding exactly like 2019 that started this whole mess. No, it's not consumers that are going to have to pay the burden. Consumers are going to be fine. You're going to get your money back. You're going to get rebates. But those big polluters are going to have to pay up. Those are the ones that are going to have to pay. It's not going to affect the cost of anything. And now look at it. It's because such a burden to this country that people are angry and ferociously opposed to the carbon tax, as they should. It's affected every single area of their lives. And Mark Carney, with a stroke of pen, manipulated you to think that he's actually going to eliminate the carbon tax and say, well, it's not going to be consumers' problem anymore, but it's still going to be a carbon tax. We're going to cut it for you and make it not noticeable, and you won't get the rebates for it, but we're still going to have the carbon tax. We still have to have the carbon tax. Why? Because, we got to make things more competitive. And we got to convince people to get more green energy products. Which we know that through the carbon tax, they have not done any investment into environmentalism. All this false promise of all the money we're going to raise is going to make our energy sector better. It's going to do this. It's going to do that. All these empty it's done nothing. It's done nothing. Except fill the pockets of career politicians like Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland and so many other people on board with this. It's filled their pockets and screwed you over and over again. And that's what this guy's doing. He's hoping that you don't remember 2019. He's trying to memory hold the fact that what started the carbon tax is exactly this speech. And it's just going to continue on. So, Mark Carney did not eliminate carbon tax. He wants you to believe it. He wants to prance around and garner more votes because of it and make you believe that he did, but he didn't. He's never going to. Because the carbon tax, the pricing on carbon pollution is something that he has been working for his entire life. He was he grandfathered the idea of instituting that into financing. He's done that through central banking. He's done that through his governorships of the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada, through Brookfield. He even said just a month ago, well, here's this.
If you
A month ago, literally a month ago, before he announced that he's cutting the carbon tax, Mark Carney admits planning permanent carbon tax tariffs and increasing industrial carbon tax. Literally a month ago. So this is the whole agenda. This is really what's happening. Is that he's going to make a bill to make it look like he's cutting taxes. At the same time, he's going to put tariffs on other countries that if they don't get into line with this climate agenda, this globalist climate agenda, which we know it's not really helping the environment whatsoever, and it's very questionable, very suspicious. If you don't get into line with that, they're going to put tariffs on you. And it's going to affect more of consumers. So this is not eliminating carbon taxes. This is not a win. This is just rebranding and hoping you get tricked by this. And it's even so bad. It's even so bad that the CBC is calling this guy out. The CBC is calling out the Liberal Party for deceiving Canadians. Never thought I'd see the day. Even when even state media starts telling you the truth, you know the house of cards is collapsing. About time. The CBC that was pretty much cheerleading and steadfasting for Mark Carney to get immediately ushered in is now telling you the truth. And on their top show from this is from the National, they're going to tell you how exactly the Liberal Party is deceiving you by pretending that they're getting rid of the carbon tax when they really aren't. Listen to this.
Andrew, on that.
Well, the sad and bizarre part is it's not as if people are not, unless we don't have any carbon policy at all, there's going to be a carbon policy. It will cost things and it will cost consumers. There won't be a rebate anymore. So the idea that we're actually going to be letting people out of some sort of hardship as a result of this is completely bogus. It's going to mean we're going to have a more expensive, less efficient system without rebates that ultimately the cost will get passed on to consumers. They just won't know it. And that is basically what the compromise, the agreement that's been made amongst all the parties now is, let's just keep the public in the dark.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. That is too revealing, CBC. How long until the Liberal Party will be on the side of defunding the network? I thought you guys are on our side. I paid you money to shut your face and just praise me. Do I have to get Trudeau to your headquarters and do a fake cry? Doing some lecture about how it's important to have a relationship? It's important to have a partnership? I thought you guys are friends. I paid you money to shut your face and do state propaganda. Why? Why would you deceive me like that? But they're dead straight on that this carbon tax policy isn't going to go away. It's not going away. They've initialized it. They try to grandfather it in as much as possible. So for you to think that it was going to be eliminated at the stroke of a pen because Mark Carney got ushered in, it's laughable. It's laughable. And it shows the utter hypocrisy. And all they're doing this is to garner more votes. That's the only purpose to this. So, Viva Fry reminds us that in 2019, the Liberal Party passed the carbon tax and called it a success. In 2025, the Liberal Party cancels that same carbon tax and calls that a success. If you vote for Liberals, you are an idiot. I wouldn't use that term, but I would say you're definitely brainwashed. You're definitely propagandized. You're definitely in a Stockholm Syndrome-like trance to think that the party responsible for implementing this tax that has done nothing but devastation for the country and its people is going to be championed for reversing it. Which they're not reversing it. They're just trying to rebrand it. So don't be fooled by this. Don't be fooled to think that it's going to go away. All Mark Carney is doing is trying to do a gimmick to make it look like he's eliminating for you, but making secret taxes for big businesses, which is going to domino to you. You're going to still have to pay for it, but you're not going to get the pleasure of the rebate, which makes it even worse. It makes it even worse in the long run. But it works well for someone like Mark Carney, who's trying to garner more votes, because here's Government EXE is corrupt. Breaking, Mark Carney has passed Pierre Poilievre and now has a 52% chance of becoming prime minister after the next election. Things are going from bad to worse for the CPC, for the Conservative Party. So now that he's done this gimmick, and Canadians are being blindsided by this because they're not being told in the fact that Mark Carney, while doing this bill, while doing this executive order, is sidestepping to put more taxation and do a climate tariff on goods and services. So you're still going to have to pay for it. You're still going to have to pay the burden of this climate agenda, but you're not even going to get the rebate. So how is this beneficial? How is this working out for the Canadian public? How is this making us more competitive when you're still going to implement these horrific policies that drove a lot of business away? That's a lot. One of the reasons why businesses drove to the United States. The United States doesn't have carbon taxes. A lot of countries don't have carbon taxes. They do a lot of initiatives with the environment, but they don't have carbon taxes. We do. And it's just done nothing but damage, nothing but harm, hasn't really done anything for the environment whatsoever. In fact, our emissions that were supposed to be lowered through taxation got even worse. It got even worse. Because all these corporate businesses, all these big entities that were trying to pressure didn't do anything to drop emissions because they just bought out carbon credits. So they don't have to. But it's going to cost you even more. You're going to be lectured more about how you need to convert to an electric vehicle you can't afford, how you can't use a wood fire stove. So Mark Carney, once again, fooled the general public into garnering more votes. And that is why he chose this time, at this moment, to cancel the carbon tax. Even though Canadians have been desperately, angrily, ferociously demanding the elimination of the carbon tax. That's why Pierre Poilievre got so popular. That's why so many supporters went towards Pierre Poilievre. Now that Mark Carney did this, Pierre Poilievre can't use that statement anymore. He can't say axe the tax. He can't do this. But he can point out that Mark Carney's just doing carbon tariffs. That's still a tax. He's still taxing big businesses. That's going to put the burden on you. But Pierre Poilievre's not doing that. And that's his Achilles heel. That's what's making his numbers drop. And Mark Carney fooling more Canadians to think that he's on the side of you, when really he's trying to do a switcheroo to bait you for more votes.